Hello, everybody. Welcome. This is part of the Blue Train essay specialist team, and today we're just going to have a quick conversation about the personal statement process. So, just to kind of introduce everyone that's on this call, just raise your hand when I say your name. This is Celeste. This is Hannah. This is Melissa. Oh, yep. This is Kevin. And this is Matt. Yeah. So, hey, aren't you guys wonderful? I think the first thing that we're going to talk about today is we're really just going to talk about the idea of personal statements from concept to polish. Or not the first thing, that'll kind of be what we're going to talk about for the next 45 minutes or so. And essentially, I think a lot of families have a misunderstanding about the difference between essays and personal statements and how it all gets mixed up. So just to lay it out clearly for those of you that don't know, the personal statement is a long form essay, 650 words, single spaced, single page, essentially. And the students will have to do this for the Common App. And they will usually shorten that down by 100 words for the Coalition App. So the personal statement tends to be the single most important essay that students will apply to college with. So everybody on this call and the specialists that are not here, we've dealt with thousands of essay drafts over the years. And today we're just going to talk about using some of that experience to help frame that process for everyone that's listening. So the first step is the preconceptions that people have. What preconceptions do you believe that your students or your parents come to this process with? And is it something that you have to kind of walk them away from, or any thoughts about what students come to the process with versus what they are eventually shaped into? Anybody?
Yeah.
Yeah,
You go, Hannah. You go.
Great.
Yeah,
Love
yeah.
to go.
Yeah.
I think there's two things to think about. I think it's easy to feel like this is all going to take place in one step, and that you might be able to sit down and write your essay. And I think that it's really important to remember that it's a process, and that it will take several sessions of working. It will take several weeks. And so it's great if you have something in mind. It's great if you have a draft of something that you like. But just keeping in mind that it's an ongoing process that will take a little longer than your typical essay you might write for school. And the other thing I think that's important to keep in mind is sometimes there's a lot of pressure to cover a lot of different topics. And we can cover a lot of ground in your essay, but coming in with sort of a long checklist of what you like to cover in your essay is not necessarily the most effective way to begin. Your whole application is really comprehensive, and there's a lot of ways to talk about all your accomplishments, and you don't have to list everything in the personal statement.
All good points. And if I were an alien and just landed on this planet and I need to do an essay, how long would you normally say, like if you were just going to give someone a rough time span, like how long do you think an essay takes?
I mean, ideally, I would say a couple of months. In like the most luxurious time frame, you could have a couple of months to work on this essay.
And if you don't have a luxurious time span and you're kind of like a nervous student that just went when they heard that, what would you say is the kind of like, because we don't believe in procrastination the way we do with our high school essays, where a student waits until the night before and thinks they can crank it out and get an A, because that just doesn't work in this situation. But what would you say is a compressed timetable?
In a compressed timetable, I think you can get it done in a couple of weeks. Okay. You need to, in that case, commitment to, setting time aside to work on it is really crucial. Know that you're going to need several work sessions on it. And I mean, I hate to really even put a number on it, but it could take 10 different times sitting down, focusing just on this. So as many days as you think you need to get those different sessions in is how many, weeks you think you should have?
2 weeks to 2 months.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, and 2 weeks is if you are completely committed.
Yeah.
Matt, you were going to say something extraordinarily interesting. What was that going to be?
I was gonna see if you would let me go to the bathroom. No, I'm kidding. In terms of like, yeah, misconceptions about the essay. I think that a lot of times people come in thinking that they need to show how great they are at something, or that this is time to brag about how great I am at this activity, this sport, how much I influence this club. And while your participation in those things is important, I think it doesn't necessarily have to be framed as how great you are.
Right. And what do you think is the difference between confidence and cockiness? Like how does someone ride that line and not drift over into the brag, humble brag, like the unattractive qualities that none of us like?
Yeah, well, language is important, right? How we frame these things. And I think showing versus telling, right? Like, show us how you participated in this sport or this activity, and the connections you made with other people, and the specific places and moments and things that you participated in. That will cultivate something that is experiential and shows your commitment and your participation in something, versus the general side of things, which is talking about like, I won this and I did this, and that kind of approach.
Like the list of awards and honors and activities that you would see. What about on the left side of the screen? My left. What do you have as any preconceptions you guys tend to see, Kevin, Melissa, or Celeste?
One of the things that I tend to see a lot, especially when a student is wanting to write about their community service, is that they will attempt to, in the nicest way possible, create an application for them to be canonized as a saint. It is as if they have to show the most purest, most perfect part of themselves, and it often feels very disconnected to who they actually are. And yeah.
Yeah, and I think that students, this sounds terrible, but I used to call it community service, like pet that they used to have. Like they'll pick one person that they helped in their community service. I'll name her Lauren or Arturo, and the student will spend all this time how they helped this person like in a saintly way. And we've seen so many of those that we just say be careful of just kind of giving a fictional version of your community service to kind of boost yourself up, and it doesn't feel real. And we do want to learn what you got out of the experience. We do want to see how you've grown from it, but we also see there are certain cliches that people fall into, like they grab one student or one kid that they helped, and then they make it their kind of Finding Forrester movie about like this kid. But Celeste, I think you were going to say something too.
Just I see a lot of students and their parents kind of assume that colleges want certain things, and then they're afraid that they don't have that special story, or they're not showing those certain traits. So I just always try to tell them, like, it's about showing who you are and your personality.
And when they're expecting to see certain things, because we do know that some students think that the schools want a sob story, like, oh, how hard your life has been or something. And some students like literally get forlorn that they don't have like a crisis in their life. They're like, nothing terrible has happened to me. It sucks. It's like, really? If that's your biggest problem? But you're saying, so you have to help them find other things, right? And what could those other things be?
So many things.
Yeah, I mean, anybody, we can throw out anybody. Like I don't want to put Celeste on the spot there, but what other things do these students talk about? Because a lot of people that don't know these essays don't really know what goes on, and they think that it really is an activity, a community service activity. I go that way if a student doesn't really have anything else, right? Unless it's really their main thing that they want to talk about. But students are multifaceted. What are some other things, passions? What else do you guys find that they talk about? Kevin?
Yeah, some of the best essays, for example, in our personal statement packet, are some of the ones that the students like the most, or like Bag of Masks or Ecosystem, where the point of the essay almost is that I can't be confined purely by 650 words. Where you're just kind of getting brief, horizontal slices of like who this person is. It obviously, still has to be tied together by something central, but yeah, the essay does not need to be one cohesive chronological movement from introduction to conclusion where, it's just one story, one thing that happened to you that has this kind of much wider implications for who you are as a person. It can be that, and if it is that, that's great. But that's one of the kind of preconceptions I think a lot of students enter in with, is this idea of the college admissions officer is this like kind of parasitic Skynet, this like weird AI that's just sort of feeding on people's suffering. And if it's not that, then they don't want it. And it's not really true, I mean, they're just sort of human beings.
I've heard you call them bureaucratic vampires in the past.
I've been known to call them bureaucratic vampires as well. There's a lot of different terms to describe this kind of person, but they're not real people, I mean, they're just actual human beings, these college admissions officers. At the end of the day, just want to hear, a good story that has they have some emotional connection with, and that improves their understanding of who you are in a way that cannot just be encapsulated by your activities and your honors and, your saintly behaviors.
Your saintly behaviors. So what do you think, because I think everybody on, that's listening to this all want something that is going to move, we call it moving the needle from maybe borderline acceptance or into acceptance or get a scholarship. What do we think that, like, what moves the admissions officers? Are there any kind of qualities a student have? I know, and I say this kindly to all the parents that are listening. A lot of times, the dads are like, tell them you're determined and you have persistence. And the mom's like, show them how you helped somebody and how all these awards you won. And they kind of do have those kind of vectoring points. And those aren't necessarily off, but there's also, as we said, space in between. So what would be something that the admissions officer actually reads that could make them more interested in this candidate versus the other two essays they read before or after? Because we read a lot of essays and a lot of them are not moving the needle and some of them do, and we want them all to move the needle. But what, from your experience, because you guys have all read a ton, what would you say are the ones that move the needle, and what do they do for you? And that could be some of the essays in the packet. I'm going to send the packet out with this recording so people can the parents can read some of the essays. But what would you say is some of the things that move you as a reader?
I think authenticity.
I always find, sorry.
Oh no, go ahead. I didn't see you starting.
All right. We'll go Melissa first.
The thing that always moves. Oh, sorry. I didn't realize. Okay. The thing that always moves me is when it is so clear and so obvious what a student loves or what a student is passionate about in their essay. And even if that has no connection to the rest of their application, just the pure innate, like, I love this thing so much that I get to write about. I get this opportunity to write about this thing. Those are the essays that really excite me and move me.
Yeah, so we think about Skrizit, in the packet. That kid applied as a neuroscience major, but he writes about a deep passion for music. Obviously, he talks about an obstacle he's gotten over too. Now, I want to go back to why passions are important, but I want Matt to jump in first with what he was going to say.
Yeah, I guess I was just gonna, it's a similar thing, but authenticity, right? So like we're writing about our personal experience and something that we've either loved or enjoyed, something that that happened to us. This story is about you, right? So you have to play the central role in the essay and in your experience. So I like essays that I can feel like I can get to know a kid, right? You talk a lot about how the essay should be an example of how this kid might fit in on a college campus, right? So like, I like an essay that gives me an image of a kid, like, oh, this is a kid who I can see really getting involved with this club or organization, or this is a future this person, or you know what, this guy's going to be a really great and supportive roommate.
Yeah.
something, it could be anything, right? There's any quality, but it all stems back to what is something authentically you, usually based off of something that happened to you or you did.
Yeah, and to go back to some of those points, so when I think that someone thinks a USC admissions officer is reading this and they're thinking, who will be a good person to add to our Trojan network who will help us in the future take over the world, right? And it's not that way. USC still wants to build a good community. USC, I talked to the admissions officer after they had, hate to put it this way, but they had 10 suicide attempts in their freshman class. And they said the first thing they realized is they were not looking at these students as people, they were looking at numbers, and that shifted a lot of their focus. And that was right when they started doing the short answer questions to try to find playfulness. And they want to make sure that they are getting students that will make a healthy community for everybody, not just a competitive community. But if the community is healthy, it's like an ecosystem. Everybody will benefit. You will benefit, your roommate will be happier, everybody will kind of work in synergistic fashion. So like, Matt mentioned about being a good, I think you said a caring roommate, I forget what word you said. But I always think about if someone breaks up with their boyfriend or girlfriend or gets broken up with or has a sickness in their family or fails a class, is this person's essay I'm reading going to be a compassionate human being? Will they be a good person? Will this person be intellectually curious on campus and wanting to find new things? They don't just have to say, I've always wanted to be an engineer since I did my Legos in the Rector set, and now I want to be an engineer. I think that's what a lot of people think the A to B to C is. But the reality is, as we know, as Melissa stated, and as Matt just stated, the authentic, true, curious, passionate person is kind of what these admissions officers are looking for, like diamonds in the rough, so to speak, with good humanity. So how do you get this story from the students? How do you get them to create this? Essentially, they come to you, everyone in this call and our other specialists as well have all done one-on-ones, you've all done workshops, you've all done writing labs, but you have a student that just shows up and they are like big puppy dog eyes, like, please help me, I don't know what to write. So what are the steps to go from no story to story? Anybody? Hannah?
Yeah. The first step, I think, is we were talking about preconceptions. Strip away your preconceptions about what this essay will be, and strip away your fear about the process. We know how to take you step by step, and like I said, you're not going to write the whole essay today, so don't worry. And the first step is to free write, and that is a process where you remove all of your any like filter that you would put on yourself typically is gone, and you'll answer questions about your life and about your experiences and about what matters to you, and answer them as honestly and fully as you can. And that's the first step, is to really, it's exploring, and that's for a lot of people a really fun place to start. It's just sort of swimming around and finding what sounds exciting to you.
Yeah, and this is out to everybody, sometimes do you feel like when you're free writing or when you're reading students' free writes that you find little gems in there that the students don't even recognize are gems? And how do you alert that? Matt's got a little smirky smile. So like, Matt, how do you take a student that has a mass of words and they're just like, here, and they just don't really know what to do with it? Because they don't know how to go from that to the next stage. But
Yeah.
So how do you start?
It reminds me of when we used to do this in person. We would pass out a bunch of highlighters to all of the essay specialists, read through the free writes and highlight. It could be a line, a moment, a reference to something, and from that day on, I always thought of my dad as Darth Vader. If that's in somewhere, and I mean, that would be a dark essay potentially, but there's it comes full circle.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
But any little moment or detail that pops out could be a foundation for an essay or a possible thing to explore. So sometimes it's not the most obvious thing that that we end up writing about, right? So like we have to kind of like, you know, poke around in our minds a little bit, and these free writes really let that process happen. I think free write's different for a lot of people, right? So you were mentioning stream of consciousness, Hannah. I sometimes have kids that are like, can't do it, won't do it, don't want to do this, that. So I'm like, all right, let's do bullet points. Just like make lists about different moments in your favorite moments when you were working for Habitat for Humanity. Do you remember a certain trip? So we can start to cultivate some details and things to work off of.
And when you do that, do you start to see the constellation for the stars, so to speak? The idea that, you know, you're seeing that they did something, you know, Habitat for Humanity, they helped their mom take care of their little sister. They, you know, do beach cleanups by themselves on Saturday mornings. You know, do you start to kind of draw connections to that constellation that they can't necessarily see, or sometimes they do see it, but you know, how does that all work? And that goes to everyone, Matt first, but.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that's the most fun part about the process for me, as you know, doing this job, is like I get to know somebody in kind of like this hyper fast like debrief where I get to learn about you through your free writes and an interview process in either the writing lab or a one-on-one. And then we are looking for connections that we can make between all these things. And in that case that Scott just mentioned, it would be like, okay, so you're a helper. You're someone that likes to help people or help the environment. This is now maybe a window into, okay, let's talk about some other places where you feel like you have been helpful to people, or maybe someone was helpful to you, and we can start to thread a needle on what is going to actually take place in an essay.
Yeah, and that essay, that's a perfect example, because then the essay becomes the helper essay rather than the Habitat for Humanity community service essay. And that goes to a lot deeper of a level of what the admissions officers would want, and that differentiates that from other people. But how about everyone else going from, you know, getting the free writes? You know, what have you experienced or seen, or what would you say about that process? Anything?
One of my favorite parts about seeing people's free writes is, you know, there's a lot of students that don't think of themselves as writers, right?
Mm-hmm.
They are, maybe they're STEM people, or maybe their creative, you know, avenue of choice is music or art, or, you know, any number of things, right? Kind of slowly realizing, oh, I actually can tell a story, right? There is something here. And that starts with the free writes, right? With just barfing everything up, not worrying about as much about grammar, like not worrying as much about like, let's make sure this is up, you know, I don't want to do a run-on sentence here. Like, it's fine to do these things because you just sort of discover things about yourself, things about your story that you wouldn't have otherwise. And then when you reread it with a critical eye, you can find things, this often happens to me, that it's almost like being in therapy, right? It's the things you don't say that are more important, right? Or the sort of meaning behind the meaning. When you can find that, a lot of the times things just sort of pop, and a nucleus for an idea, for a concept, can come together very quickly from there. Yeah.
I mean, I remember a student, Tiffany, a long time ago, had been writing free write, literally like 30 pages of free writes. And she says, I just don't know what I want to write about. And then I'm looking at all these free writes, and she's like, you know, it's weird. I kind of like doing these free writes. I want to do more of them. And then we realized her essay was really about the process. She likes the process of things. She didn't even really care about getting to the end of the essay. And then, so we picked one of her examples where she did a research internship where she just broke eggs into a centrifuge to find the proteins. And she said that every day I would crack 100 eggs, you know, at 8-minute intervals into a centrifuge. And she's like, her first line was, one summer I cracked, I don't know how many eggs into a centrifuge, didn't find out why I did it, and I couldn't have been happier. You know, just talking about the process things. And the whole essay was about the process. We've had students write about staring out the window during a math class and studying the birds outside and the details that they get from watching these. The girl named that essay, What You Notice When You're Not Paying Attention. She wasn't paying attention to the teacher. She was paying attention to something else. So there are all these ways students kind of go away from maybe what is easy and in front of them, and the free writes highlight these like little sparkly parts about themselves that we can chase down. But then the question is, once we get some of these, how do we shape them? So we talk about the container stage. So, Celeste, what would you say is kind of the container stage for people that don't really understand what that means?
Theater stage is when you go from these free writes to like I don't know, sometimes it's easy to explain it to students as like paragraphs, like these different sections of your story that you're going to be moving through. So that could be a chronological story, and you start at the beginning, the middle sections, so you get to the end. But they're just the different pieces of your story.
And sometimes, what do we do with those structures in order to kind of find, Kevin, you've talked about the difference between an essay and a story. Like, how would you talk about that and also Hannah, you talk about narrative drive. But so, Kevin, what would you say in that case about going from essay to story? What's the difference between a 5-paragraph essay that you do for Mrs. Crabtree in 10th grade English, where you have a thesis sentence, topic sentences, and a conclusion that makes her happy, versus this that we're trying to do in this new world?
Well, first off, I think one of the key things in any story, and even in some of the examples you've used about like the eggs and that, is that we're centering like your point of view, right? Your experience and your sort of subjectivity, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not I cracked an egg. It's I cracked an egg and I felt this kind of way, right? It's not I got really good guitar. It's my fingers were calloused and I wish I could stop, but I just can't, right? I mean, that kind of thing. Where the intention is more of an emotional connection, and it's something that can be more unique, right? The 5-paragraph essay structure is with the hamburgers and that whole metaphor is great when you're in high school, but it's sort of something, that's good to move out of because, I don't know, 75%, 80% of the essays these college admissions officers will read will have a more, typical topic sentence, body paragraphs, conclusion, will really be like closely hewing to that structure. And, any opportunity to stand out, especially now with these more qualitative aspects of the application having to take on a larger importance than they have historically, I think it just is really important. And so the essays, it's very depersonalized. The story to me is much more personal.
Excellent. And then Hannah, just about trying to find that narrative, I think you used the term sometimes narrative progression. So how would you kind of, if a student, say Celeste said, the student does that chronological essay and you're reading it, and it's about a student that took piano lessons and then she went on and got her piano certificate, and now she plays piano at an elderly home on weekends to make people happy, and she loves the piano, but she doesn't really have a narrative drive or progression there. What might you do to those containers?
Well, something that's crucial to any story and what makes a story instead of an essay and is crucial to narrative drive is seeing a change over the course of the story. So our piano player sounds like I would ask her more questions about how she's felt about playing the piano. How is it different playing it competitively versus in an old folks home on the weekend?
Or by yourself?
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that, that can, in a narrative sense, it's going to be conflict. It doesn't have to always be conflict in this essay. It doesn't have to be that you really struggled with that piano and it was really tough and you overcame it. It can just be a change in the way that you approach that art form. Mm-hmm. So that's the way to think about your essay becoming a story, and that you're the star.
Yeah, you are the star of your own story. So one of the things that we talk about with students are, I always use the example if I'm talking about a film project, a producer will say, what genre is it and what comp films are there? Is it like thriller, comedy, and then what comp films? Is it like The Shining? Is it like Bridesmaids? What are those things? So we have our own system with essays. Our kind of genre or our structure types, is it a chronological essay? Is it a stream of consciousness essay? Is it just a passion throw up about, like Roadkill, like that essay where the girl just goes out there and talks about everything she loves about, art? Is it something with bookend structure where we start in one location, go back chaotically, and then end up back in the beginning again? Is it we call it the shapeshifter, where, as Matt has said before, form follows content? Is it the same? Are you trying to make a video game essay in the form of video game? Insert coin, level up, level up, level up, beat the boss, game over, and that's an essay structure. Is it like the ecosystem essay where it's all these conflicting things that make a balanced whole? So students will try all these different structure types. And then the comp films that we would talk about are comp essays that students get to read, and they will say, I really like Dear Basketball, so, I want to write something like that. These are great to get people's minds going. But like, Matt, if someone shows up to you and says, I want to write a Dear Basketball essay, and they don't necessarily have that story, what would you say? Or what's not to kind of throw it directly at you, but.
No, it's great. I think, it's great to have that language. So like, I always love working with kids that have taken the personal statement workshop, because we have these points of reference, right? We have the 7 structures that we know that work, so they're familiar with them. And we have example essays. So they come in maybe saying, I want to write a Dear Basketball, which was written in the form of a breakup letter, right? The girl is breaking up with basketball so that she can move on to other passions. And I say, that's great. I'm so glad you love that. But we can't decide what kind of structure you're going to use until we look at what you're going to write about, right? We need to let your free writes and the areas of interest that you have dictate the structure that we might use, right? So that video game essay, I love that. I would love to work on a kid with that. Insert coin, level up, level up. That sounds fun. But like, hopefully that guy or girl has some connection to video games or gaming or an arcade, so that it has to remain authentic, right? So that's why it is important that you move through the process in kind of this linear way.
Yeah, and you bring up a really good point, because I think a lot of students don't have a single thing. Like there's an essay called Active Shooter where a student kind of goes through the whole process of a day of learning something. There are these, like, what we call single kaleidoscopic events where someone writes about an experience. Summer in France, it was like that summer. But then there are a lot of students that don't have one thing. And they think, the UC essays are easy for these students. They can write their favorite subject. They can write about a community service project. But when they try to make one long suspension bridge essay, it's difficult, which is the personal statement, which is in a lot of cases the most important for the Common App. So what Matt just said is that vertical that we're talking about, there's an essay called AJ by Angelina Jolie, where the girl's obsessed with Angelina Jolie, and then she hangs the vertical of her ethnicity, of her family business, and her jujitsu, all on her obsession with Angelina Jolie. If she wrote it about another obsession and didn't match her interest, that essay wouldn't work. So you can't write about a video game structure if that doesn't speak to who you are. So your vertical is just as much a part of you as your horizontals are. That's why when students come up to us and they want to show different parts of themselves, and they say they want to just write about, scrolling through Instagram and looking at different pictures, or looking at the trophies around their room and having memories. We're like, everybody has a room. A lot of people have Instagrams. This really isn't it. So if we're going to talk about holding multiple things together, we still need to find an interest of yours. We still need to find an authentic passion so we can bring things together. Do you guys notice people trying to get a little too chaotic with things and not knowing how to hold together, and then using like a too easy of a kind of device? And Celeste, you're shaking your head. So like, what happens when someone says, I want to talk about the books on my bookshelf?
Funny, because that's what I was thinking of, the person looking at their room. It just lacks some authenticity, I think, as I'm reading like that essay or free write or whatever form it's in. I always feel like there's a part of the student that I'm not seeing that's probably there and more unique to them. So yeah, I usually try to go deeper.
And a lot of people have bookshelves, and a lot of people have those things. So if it's anything that could be written by someone else, like I was just reading an essay recently of someone kind of said, hey, this is an essay that I wrote before, the beginning of the summer. What do you think of it? I was like, it's well written, but it could have been written by 10,000 students. This is just like a very kind of straightforward essay. And then the students like, huh. Doesn't mean they need to kind of, destroy the whole thing, but there are workable pieces there, which brings us to the next part, which is the process of moving from container to structure, and then moving, like refining the structure. So how do you take students after they have their order, their process? We talk about these, Celeste saying paragraphs, but sometimes, as we know, containers can be 2 paragraphs. It's almost just like a beat of the story that you're trying to move around. And sometimes you're moving things around to find, as Hannah said, the narrative progression. But what do you guys do with your students to help them find how to find that drive with those pieces? Do you kind of, I have my little ideas and tricks, but I'm curious what you guys are doing. And I'm sure we do a lot of the same things because we talk all the time. But anybody want to jump in there? Stumped.
I keep going first, but I'll do it again.
Yeah.
I really I try to emphasize the fact that there are a lot of different ways that the containers can go together, and that the process of shuffling them around, in fact, is all useful, even if they're obviously we have to pick one order at the end of the day, but finding the different connections between them shows you all of the different pieces of yourself that can be in a single essay. And so I do think it's important to be able to move them around and realize that not every piece of your container, if it ends up being 2 paragraphs, you may not end up using both those paragraphs of the container in your final essay. And finding those connections is really useful, and realizing, oh wait, I have a piece of this container that actually it could go in either container. That sort of more, you've been really kind of in the weeds, you've been really close to your content, and the container process allows you to kind of zoom out like you're on a drone and view it from like 10,000 feet up in the air, and you are starting to finally see the essay as an entire being. And the process of moving stuff around and seeing things in different order, finding new connections is all a really important part of that.
Yeah, and I always say, if you move those orders around and a container falls off or dies like a dead leaf, that's a win. That means that you're able to accomplish the same amount, but now you've kind of cut down the words. I don't know how many times people bring essays to us, and the first thing I think is, you don't even need that introduction. And they're like, but that talks about me preparing to go on the trip to Mount Whitney, and I have all my equipment, and I'm showing that I'm preparing. I'm like, just drop us into Mount Whitney. Like, you're on the trail, like get in there and then like show that, and then tell us why you're there after the fact. I don't know, Matt, you always talk about movies and how they open, like.
Do I? Yeah, well, we talk about this a lot. Scott and I are big movie guys. I think so is Celeste, Hannah, maybe everybody. Melissa,
I think
Kevin,
everybody,
like movies here. But something I like to work on with my students too, is this active voice, right? You start in the middle of the chase scene, right? You're running down the dark alley, chasing after the guy who just robbed the bank. There's dollar bills floating past your head, and your foot smashes into a puddle. Like, paint a picture of what's happening. Just like Scott said, like, take us to the top of Mount Whitney. Start there, right? Start in the moment, because we want these essays to be more show than tell when we finish them, right? Along the way, you're probably going to start with a little bit more telling, so that you and your specialists can find the best moments to use for showing. But we want to let our experience speak for us more than just a recap. It's more exciting. It's more engaging to do with the essay.
Yeah. Does anyone else want to pop in on that? That idea about, rearranging things, finding the active pathway. Anything, Kevin?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think exactly what you're saying. It's key to know kind of like where your story starts and where it ends, like what the overall arc is, where you begin, how you changed over time. Because it might not be a straight line between the two, but you know now where you have to end up, you know now where you have to start. And, if the story's about, a bank robbery, then yeah, you don't need to show him in the shower in the morning, right? I mean, but that there's nothing wrong with the fact that you wrote that in order to get there, right? I mean, if that was part of your process, if you needed to describe what you had for breakfast the morning before you went to Mount Whitney, that's good. It's just because you deleted it did not mean it was a waste. It was still a very good thing.
No wasted writing.
No wasted writing, no wasted words at all. It's impossible. And that's something that's not just useful for this. It's anytime you have to write pretty much anything, it's usually a good idea to overwrite. I mean, 650 words is the end goal. It's not the beginning goal, right? I mean, if your first draft is 650 words, something has probably gone wrong. There's just more you left out than you had to. You felt some pressure that didn't exist yet to meet that. But yeah, just being willing to experiment, I think, is also just a huge thing of saying, let me move this around. If it doesn't work, I will not use it, but it was still worth finding out for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's all, I think that everyone here, if David were here, he'd be the one to say, if a student has 1,200 words or 2,000 words, I'm way happier than if they come in with 700 words. And I think that we all kind of agree with that. So, got about 10 minutes left here. When we're talking about students going from that kind of 2,000 word draft to the 650 word draft, what advice would you be giving them on how to do that? Or what things do you try to do to encourage them to find that path? Are they cutting and pasting like monsters? I don't know what that means. Are they kind of, just kind of looking at words in a thesaurus? What are they doing? Like, how do they get from one path to the next, or one version to the next? Anybody?
I mean, I think one thing I tell them to do is, if it's really long, print it out, have it as kind of your guidepost, and rewrite it, because you'll end up making connections where this doesn't need to be 2 sentences, or I don't need to say, I wanted to go to the movies. If you went to the movies, you can just say, I went to the movies. You don't need to include that. You just sort of find yourself doing these little things when you're making a more critical reread, rewrite, than just copy pasting and looking for specific things. Yeah, that critical lens is huge in that part of it.
Copying and pasting can be a detriment because people are bringing cross-pollinating different time periods, and the essay they don't even realize the essay starts to have this kind of stop-start flow, and it really disengages the reader. Whereas something that is constantly combed and rewritten in the moment, even if it's just little word choices, or, you know what, I don't know about you guys, but sometimes I'll read my own writing and I pretend I'm somebody different. I'm like, I wonder what, my manager will think when he reads this, or I wonder what, so-and-so will think. And I get bored of my own writing, and I'll be like, all right, if I'm bored in this part, everyone else probably is as well. I just want to get my eyes past this. And then I'll put like that in red, and I'll say, maybe I don't even need this. And I'll get kind of vicious, and I'll just pull big chunks out left and right. And I think that, as Matt sometimes says, you can't be precious. You got to kill your darlings. And so when you go through these drafts, as Kevin said, sometimes it's helpful to print it out. Sometimes it's helpful to make duplicate copies. We do worry about people getting too many cooks in the kitchen at this time. Does anyone want to talk about that? And we say this kindly for parents out there. We say this kindly for everybody. But sometimes anybody gets very fragile when they're writing these things. And it can be really easy to, cut the hamstrings on somebody who had a good flow just by saying some things. So what do you guys feel about, getting to that final polish? Anybody?
Yeah, I think for a lot of students, this is one of the first really vulnerable pieces of writing that they've ever had to do. And so giving that piece of writing to someone that you, even if you trust them a lot, if they aren't prepared to understand that vulnerability that you've put into your essay, then it's going to end up pulling you further back, and it's going to end up making you feel worse about this thing that you put your heart and soul into. So treat your writing as part of your emotional health as well, and understand that like this element of vulnerability is vulnerable.
Yeah, and I know you use the word vulnerable a lot because you appreciate vulnerability in the essays, and you know that the admissions officers appreciate that as well. We see, some of our favorite essays, I think everyone on this call would agree, but some of our favorite essays are the ones where students don't come off like they're perfect. Students don't come off like they have all the answers and they don't know exactly what they want to be when they grow up and they've won all the awards. Those people are great to be like, oh, cool. But there are the students that actually hold that vulnerability and protect that vulnerability and then create an essay that kind of showcases their strengths and that vulnerability, kind of like a bag of masks does, kind of like some of these other essays do. But we've got about 5 minutes here. I just want to go around the horn because we're keeping it short today. I'm going to go around the horn and just ask if you could just say one bit of advice that you would give to students who may be in any stage of the process right now. I'll actually kick it off with Matt on the bottom right. What would you be saying to someone no matter where they are in the process right now?
I would say keep the faith. Writing is rewriting. So like this is a process, right? So recognize where you are in that process. It's okay if you're at the beginning and you're at the middle, if you're a little bit close to the end, but don't ever think that you're at the end when you're not at the end. So who can help you with that? That's where we come in. I love working with people at any point in this process, via the writing labs or one-on-one. It's been really nice to get with people sharing screens and working on the Google Doc at the same time together. It's provided kind of like a new kind of focus, and it's been really nice to do that with kids in the workshop. So I think trust whoever you're working with to let you know where you are in that process, and don't be afraid to keep writing and keep working towards that best version.
I know I'm kind of soft serving you a pitch here, but do you feel like you try to make the students better writers through this process, and it's not just about the personal statement? Like, how do you approach that?
Oh yeah, I think there's so much to be gleaned from this process, right? For so many students, this is the first time they're ever doing this type of creative writing or writing about themselves. So there's great introspection about yourself. We teach you valuable tools about writing, right? Like learning to write in an active voice, including sensory details, how to captivate a reader, how to work through a story from an A to a Z. So there's a lot of stuff that will be beneficial to you, whether or not you write again after this college essay, which most of you will have to write something in college, whether you want to do creative writing or not. I think that this process kind of teaches you how to take a big idea or have no idea, brainstorm something, and then eventually put it together in a way that you can be proud of.
Yeah, great. Because I think it's all about using this process to make people better writers every step of the way and finding their voice. Kevin?
I enjoy it because it is an interesting. I think it's a little more personable and dynamic than some of the other parts of the applications process, right? So there's a lot to learn from it. But as well, I mean, like I said earlier, it's a lot like therapy. You got to be honest, you got to be honest with, one of us, if you're in session with us or the other great essay specialists, about this is what I want to do, or this is what I feel very strongly about, or, maybe I don't know about that structure or this one, as well, you've got to be honest, obviously within the piece itself. I mean, there's a lot to it, but not as much as it's not as intimidating as it might seem at first glance, right? It doesn't have to be the scariest thing in the world. It can be. a fun project if you let it be. And when people do, they end up getting a lot more out of it than, I mean, obviously they get into great schools and everything, but they get even more out of it than that, you know, a little extra on the side.
Yep, totally. Melissa?
The one thing that I would recommend to all students is to go into the process already assuming that your admissions officer thinks that you are super smart and super good and super cool, and they already love you so much, and you just have to you don't have to prove it to them that you're a good person or that you're a smart person. They already want you to be that, so you don't have to force that for yourself, and they're rooting for you. They want you to get in.
Yeah, it's actually, that is true. A lot of people think it's the opposite. It's almost like when you understand the intelligence of your audience, you know, if you're writing something, it's like, it's saying like, look, we're all starting on the same level here. I'm going to start from that point. And I think that's a really good point. Celeste?
I think I'd say be really honest with whoever you're working with about where you are. Because some of the best essays I've seen, my students were like, hey, like I'm really struggling to get through this part, or I'm never getting into college, or they're just writing about something really personal that, you know, they've had to relive by writing it. And just by telling us where you are, it will help you get through that, because writing can be a really powerful tool, not just for getting into college, but for getting to know yourself. I'd say most of my students, like, I feel like they get more out of writing their essays as a person than maybe just like being able to go to college. So.
Yeah, and I know that nobody listening to this believes that, but we all believe it because we've all seen it. How many students will say that, you know, we have the exit surveys from Blue Train, and so many of them say the personal statement was the most important part of their process, no matter how great their grades or test scores. So we see how this is a rite of passage for so many students. But Hannah, what would be your closing remarks?
Just to keep going. There are going to be moments in the process when it's very difficult, and you will feel frustrated, and just remember to keep going. And the good news is there's plenty of work to do. So when one part gets hard, it's a good idea to switch over to another part. And sometimes taking your attention away from something that feels really stuck and frustrating, that's all it needs, just a little space.
Well,
Yeah,
space.
I think Matt said keep the space, keep the faith, keep the faith. Just keep writing, you'll get
And I was
there.
thinking, like, yours sounds like Dory, just keep swimming.
Yeah.
Right, doing that. You know, everybody on this call and the other essay specialists, you know, we all talk, we all share our stories with our, you know, that we're working with our students so that we can better understand how to help them. But I appreciate all of you. You guys are all so smart, and I always like listening to you and hearing your breakdowns of things. I appreciate you for coming in and saying hello to everyone. So to everyone that was listening, you know, keep on writing. And for you guys, thank you for helping us all out today. Bye, guys.